Scandinavia, the land of the Vikings, is one of the harshest places to live in the world. The long, dark winters, freezing temperatures and limited farmland made life a constant struggle for the people who lived there. But despite these hardships, the Vikings thrived. They became known as fierce warriors, daring explorers and successful traders, and their influence can still be felt today. So if you're ready to learn more about these amazing people, let's get started. The Vikings were a Scandinavian people who lived from the 8th to the 11th century AD. They lived in what is now Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and their name literally means people from the fjords, or people of the fjords. Their society was organized into small kingdoms ruled by kings. Each kingdom was made up of several chieftains who in turn ruled over smaller groups of people. The Vikings believed in a religion called Norse paganism, which was a collection of beliefs and practices that were common throughout Scandinavia. This religion was polytheistic, meaning that the Vikings believed in many gods. Some of their most important gods included Thor, the god of thunder, Odin, the god of wisdom and war, and Frey, the god of fertility and prosperity. The Vikings also had a strong belief in fate or destiny. They believed that every person had a specific fate that was predetermined. This belief led them to take great risks because they believed that if something bad was going to happen to them, it would happen no matter what they did. One of the key features of Viking culture was their longships. These ships were large, fast and maneuverable vessels that were perfect for exploring and raiding. They were typically around 100 feet long and could carry up to 100 warriors. The Vikings used their longships to travel all over Europe, as well as to North Africa and the Middle East. Their longships allowed the Vikings to become some of the greatest explorers of their time. They were the first Europeans to set foot in North America, and they explored much of the North Atlantic Ocean. Despite their reputation as fierce warriors, most Vikings were actually farmers. Only a small percentage of the population were warriors, but they were still a powerful force to be reckoned with. Vikings were known for their skill in battle, and their longships allowed them to strike quickly and then disappear just as quickly. In 793 AD, a group of Vikings led by an unknown leader attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in England. The monastery was home to around 700 monks, and it was considered to be one of the most sacred places in England. The Vikings killed or enslaved most of the monks and stole or destroyed the rest of their possessions. This raid is considered to be the beginning of the Viking Age, a period of time when Vikings raided, traded, and explored all over Europe. It's not entirely clear why the Vikings chose Lindisfarne to be their first target. However, it's believed that they were looking for wealth, and the monastery was one of the richest places in England at the time. It's also possible that the Vikings were simply testing the waters to see how easy it would be to raid other places. After the success of the Lindisfarne raid, the Vikings began to expand their raids across England, France, and Ireland. They were particularly fond of monasteries because they were usually full of valuables, and the monks were often peaceful and unprepared to defend themselves. However, the Vikings weren't just interested in raiding and pillaging, they also engaged in trade and exploration. In fact, the Vikings had trading posts all over Europe and the Middle East. They traded a variety of goods, including fur, timber, and slaves. The Vikings were also known for their craftsmanship, and they produced many beautiful items, including jewelry, weapons, and artwork. Despite their accomplishments, the Viking Age came to an end in the 11th century. There are a few reasons for this. One is that the Vikings' thirst for exploration and adventure eventually took them to far-off lands like North America, where they found vast open spaces without the competition of other Europeans. As more and more Vikings converted to Christianity, they began to abandon their old ways, and finally, the increasing power of the English, French, and Irish also contributed to the end of the Viking Age. As these kingdoms became stronger, they were able to defend themselves against Viking raids. Daily life for the Vikings was very different for men, women, and children. Men were typically farmers or warriors, and they spent their days working in the fields or training for battle. Women were also typically farmers, but they also had other responsibilities, such as taking care of the children and managing the household. Children were expected to help out on the farm, and they often started working at a young age. In general, Viking society was egalitarian, meaning that there was relatively little social mobility. A person's status in society was largely determined by their birth. However, there were a few exceptions to this rule. For example, a skilled warrior or a successful trader could improve their status through their achievements. Viking society was also very democratic. The people had a lot of say in how they were governed, and they often had a say in who was elected to positions of power. This was especially true in things where the assembly had the final say in all matters of law and policy. Religion also played a big role in daily life for the Vikings. They believed in a number of gods, and they often held festivals and rituals in their honor. The religion also influenced the way that they viewed the world around them, and it gave them a sense of order and meaning. One of the most interesting aspects of Viking culture was their view of death. They didn't fear death, and they often celebrated it as a natural part of the cycle of life. This was reflected in their art and literature, which often depicted scenes of death and the afterlife. The Vikings also had a strong belief in honor, and they believed that it was important to die in battle with honor rather than to live a life of shame. Adventure. The Vikings also established a number of settlements across Europe and the Middle East. These settlements were often centers of trade and commerce, and they served as a way for the Vikings to maintain their influence in areas where they didn't have a military presence. For example, the Viking settlement of Hedeby in Denmark was one of the most important trading centers in northern Europe. Similarly, the Viking settlement of Gotland in Sweden was a major hub for trade between Scandinavia and the rest of Europe. The Vikings also established a number of settlements in what is now Russia, where they traded with the Byzantine Empire and other kingdoms in the area. These settlements were often located along major trade routes, and they served as a way for the Vikings to control access to these routes. For example, the Viking settlement of Kiev in Ukraine was located along the Silk Road, and it became one of the most important cities in medieval Russia. A man by the name of Ragnar Lodbrok, who according to the legends was a Swedish king that later became a Danish king. In fact, he is credited as being the father of the Danish royal dynasty that ruled over Denmark for more than 3 centuries. He was also an infamous warrior, having led his band of elite warriors known as the Varangian Guard on many great adventures. One of these adventures included sacking the Frankish city of Paris, something that had never been done before or since. But he also has another claim to fame. He is perhaps best known today for his visit to the island of Ireland, where he went on a grand rampage that is today remembered in song and story as the Irish saga known as the Regan Smith. This is how Ragnar Lothbrok and his band of Viking warriors landed on the shores of Ireland and terrorized the island for weeks. It is a story filled with gods, monsters, magic, murder, and mayhem. And it is a story that I am going to tell you right now. There is no physical evidence that Ragnar Lothbrok ever existed. His existence is only attested to in the Viking and Irish sagas, which are basically just stories passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. So the idea is that the stories were written down at some point after the Viking Age, but they reflect events that supposedly took place during it. And this is important because there are other legendary figures in these stories, like the god Thor, Odin, and a slew of other Norse gods. So what exactly are we dealing with here? Are these stories historical accounts of a man known as Ragnar Lodbrok, or are they religious myths? Well, unfortunately, the answer is that we don't know. But regardless of whether Ragnar was a real person or not, these stories help us understand how the Vikings saw themselves, and more importantly, they give us a glimpse into their religion and their values. Now, according to the Norse religion, there are two primary realms. One realm is Midgard, the realm of men, and the other realm is Vingard, the realm of the gods. Now, these two realms are completely separate from each other, except for one very important detail. The gods, or the Einherjar as they are called, can enter the realm of men, and when they do, they are often in disguise. The reason for this is that the gods have no power over human affairs. They cannot make things happen. All they can do is observe human behavior and react to it. When the gods come to Earth, they are looking for worthy warriors, both male and female, who embody courage, strength, wisdom, and selflessness. And when they find them, they invite them back to Asgard to join the ranks of the Einherjar. Now the gods could identify these individuals without their knowledge, but they often came to Earth specifically to test them. And when they did, they would appear to humans in disguise and challenge them to contests of skill and strength, such as wrestling matches or sword fights. If the human was able to defeat the disguised god, then they would be invited to Asgard. But if they refused to fight, or if they lost the contest, then the gods would simply move on and look for someone else. The main point of all of this is that the Norse believed that the gods interacted with humans, but only in response to human behavior. The gods were not proactive. They were reactive. They didn't make things happen. They simply responded to them. So with that understanding in mind, let's get back to the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok. The story goes that while Ragnar was sailing back from a successful raid in France, his ship was caught in a storm and driven off course to the coast of Ireland. Now, when he arrived, he found himself in a land that was very different from the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia. Ireland, according to the Sagas, was a lush green land full of beautiful women and bountiful feasts. And being the good Viking that he was, Ragnar decided to stay a while and enjoy himself. But his relaxation didn't last long, because soon after arriving, he learned that the High King of Ireland was planning to marry a beautiful shield maiden named Gormleth, and he wanted Ragnar to be his best man. Now, the thing is, Ragnar wasn't really the type to be anybody's best man, and he had no intention of being dragged into some fancy wedding celebration. So he politely declined the invitation and set out to find his own adventure. And so began his rampage across the island of Ireland. He and his men pillaged monasteries, slaughtered entire villages, and even kidnapped the king's daughter. But it wasn't just mindless violence that motivated Ragnar. He was on a mission to find the legendary treasure known as the Sunstone, a magical stone that could supposedly be used to locate hidden treasures. According to the Sagas, the stone was being held by a giant named Finn Mac Cool, who lived at the edge of the world. And so Ragnar set out to find him and get the stone for himself. Along the way, he met a number of giants, monsters, and other mythical creatures, all of whom he defeated in battle. Finally, he came face to face with Finn McCool, who challenged him to a series of 3 contests. If Ragnar won, he would receive the stone, but if he lost, he would have to forfeit his life. Now, the first contest was a wrestling match, and Ragnar won easily, but the second contest was a drinking match, and Ragnar lost. Now, according to the Sagas, the reason Ragnar lost the drinking contest was because the giant tricked him by putting sleeping powder in his drink. But before Finn McCool could take advantage of Ragnar's drunken stupor and kill him, the god Thor showed up and demanded that the giant release Ragnar and give him the stone. And so Finn McCool complied, and Ragnar was free to go. Ragnar returned home after getting the stone, while others say that he continued to rampage across Ireland for another week before finally sailing home to Denmark. But either way, the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok came to an end when he sailed back to Denmark and reunited with his men. Together, they went on to conquer much of northern Europe, pillaging monasteries, burning villages, and spreading terror wherever they went. And so the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok, the great Viking warrior and king, was passed down through generations of Norsemen, inspiring awe and wonder in all who heard it. It was a culture that revered strength, courage, and selflessness above all else. And it was a culture that believed in a pantheon of gods who rewarded those who exhibited these traits. By telling the story of Ragnar Lothbrok, the Norsemen were able to pass down their values and beliefs to future generations, ensuring that their culture would live on long after they were gone. So that was a look at one of the most famous legends of the Vikings, the story of Ragnar Lothbrok. The Viking settlements were a key part of their empire-building strategy. They allowed the Vikings to maintain their influence in areas where they didn't have a military presence, and they also generated wealth and resources that could be used to support their military efforts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button so you can stay updated on all of our future videos. Also, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new uploads. We appreciate your support and hope you continue to enjoy our content. Thank you for watching.